At the time of unification, South Yemen and North Yemen had vastly different, but equally struggling underdeveloped economic systems. Since unification, the economy has been forced to sustain the consequences of Yemen's support for Iraq during the 1990–91 Persian Gulf War. Saudi Arabia expelled almost 1 million Yemeni workers, and both Saudi Arabia and Kuwait significantly reduced economic aid to Yemen. The 1994 civil war further drained Yemen's economy. As a consequence, for the past 10 years Yemen has relied heavily on aid from multilateral agencies to sustain its economy. In return, it has pledged to implement significant economic reforms. In 1997, the International Monetary Fund approved two programs to increase Yemen's credit significantly: the Enhanced Structural Adjustment Facility and the Extended Funding Facility. In the ensuing years, Yemen's government attempted to implement recommended reforms, reducing the civil service payroll, eliminating diesel and other subsidies, lowering defense spending, introducing a general sales tax, and privatizing state-run industries. However, limited progress led the IMF to suspend funding between 1999 and 2001. In late 2005, the World Bank, which had extended Yemen a four-year $2.3 billion economic support package in October 2002 together with other bilateral and multilateral lenders, announced that as a consequence of Yemen's failure to implement significant reforms it would reduce financial aid by one-third over the period July 2005 through July 2008. A key component of the $2.3 billion package, $300 million in concessional financing, has been withheld pending renewal of Yemen's PRGF with the IMF, which is currently under negotiation. However, in May 2006 the World Bank adopted an assistance strategy for Yemen under which it will provide approximately $400 million in International Development Association credits over the period FY 2006 to FY 2009. In November 2006, at a meeting of Yemen's development partners, a total of $4.7 billion in grants and concessional loans was pledged for the period 2007 to 10. At present, despite possessing significant oil and gas resources and a considerable amount of agriculturally productive land, Yemen remains one of the poorest of the world's low-income countries. More than 45% of the population lives in poverty. The influx of an average 1,000 Somali refugees per month into Yemen looking for work is an added drain on the economy, which already must cope with a 20 to 40% rate of unemployment. Yemen remains under significant pressure to implement economic reforms or face the loss of badly needed international financial support. At unification, both the Yemen Arab Republic and the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen were struggling underdeveloped economies. In the north, disruptions of civil war and frequent periods of drought had dealt severe blows to a previously prosperous agricultural sector. Coffee production, formerly the North's main export and principal form of foreign exchange, declined as the cultivation of khat increased. Low domestic industrial output and a lack of raw materials made the yard dependent on a wide variety of imports. Macroeconomic trend. This is a chart of trend of gross domestic product of Yemen at market prices estimated by the International Monetary Fund with figures in millions of Yemeni rials. For purchasing power parity comparisons, the US dollar is exchanged at 150.11 Yemeni rials only. Mean wages were $1.06 per man-hour in 2009. Remittances from Yemenis working abroad and foreign aid paid for perennial trade deficits. Substantial Yemeni communities exist in many countries of the world, including Yemen's immediate neighbors on the Arabian Peninsula, Indonesia, India, East Africa, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Beginning in the mid-1950s, the Soviet Union and People's Republic of China provided large-scale assistance to the YA. This aid included funding of substantial construction projects, scholarships, and considerable military assistance. Integration issues. In the South, pre-independence economic activity was overwhelmingly concentrated in the port city of Aden. The seaborne transit trade, which the port relied upon, collapsed with the closure of the Suez Canal and Britain's withdrawal from Aden in 1967. Only extensive Soviet aid, remittances from South Yemenis working abroad, and revenues from the Aden refinery kept the PDRY's centrally planned Marxist economy afloat. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union and a cessation of Soviet aid, the South's economy basically collapsed. Since unification, the government has worked to integrate two relatively disparate economic systems. However, severe shocks, including the return in 1990 of approximately 850,000 Yemenis from the Persian Gulf states, a subsequent major reduction of aid flows, and internal political disputes culminating in the 1994 civil war, hampered economic growth. Industries. Agriculture and fishing. Agriculture is the mainstay of Yemen's economy, generating more than 20% of gross domestic products since 1990 and employing more than half of the working population. However, a U.S. government estimate suggests that the sector accounted for only 13.5% of GDP in 2005. Numerous environmental problems hamper growth in this sector: soil erosion, sand dune encroachment, and deforestation. But the greatest problem by far is the scarcity of water. As a result of low levels of rainfall, agriculture in Yemen relies heavily on the extraction of groundwater, a resource that is being depleted. Yemen's water tables are falling by approximately 2 meters a year, and it is estimated that Sanaa's groundwater supplies could be exhausted by 2008. The use of irrigation has made fruit and vegetables Yemen's primary cash crops. With the rise in the output of irrigated crops, the production of traditional rain-fed crops such as cereals has declined. According to the Central Bank of Yemen, in 2005 the production of khat, a mildly narcotic and heavily cultivated plant that produces natural stimulants when its leaves are chewed, rose 6.7% and accounted for 5.8% of GDP. Its usage in Yemen is widespread. According to the World Bank and other economists, cultivation of this plant plays a dominant role in Yemen's agricultural economy, constituting 10% of GDP and employing an estimated 150,000 persons while consuming an estimated 30% of irrigation water and displacing land areas that could otherwise be used for exportable coffee, fruits, and vegetables. Although Yemen's extensive territorial waters and marine resources have the potential to produce 840,000 tons of fish each year, the fishing industry is relatively underdeveloped and consists largely of individual fishermen in small boats. In recent years, the government has lifted restrictions on fish exports, and production has reached 1/4 of capacity, yielding revenues valued at $260 million in 2005. Fish and fish products constitute only 1.7% of Yemen's GDP but are the second largest export. In December 2005, the World Bank approved a $25 million credit for a fisheries management and conservation project to be launched in all coastal governorates along the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. This project is expected to improve fish landing and auction facilities, provide ice plants for fish preservation, and enable Yemen's Ministry of Fisheries to undertake more effective research, resource management planning, and regulatory activities. Oil and gas. Yemen is a small oil producer and does not belong to the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, Unlike many regional oil producers, Yemen relies heavily on foreign oil companies that have production sharing agreements with the government. Income from oil production constitutes 70 to 75% of government revenue and about 90% of exports. Yemen contains proven crude oil reserves of more than 4 billion barrels, although these reserves are not expected to last more than 9 years. And output from the country's older fields is falling, a concern since oil provides around 90% of the country's exports. The World Bank predicts that Yemen's oil and gas revenues will plummet during 2009 and 2010, and fall to zero by 2017 as supplies run out. And UK's Royal Institute for International Affairs warns that instability there could expand a zone of lawlessness from northern Kenya to Saudi Arabia, while describing Yemen's democracy as fragile, and pointing to armed conflicts with Islamists and tribal insurgents. Thus Western and other diplomats and leaders are concerned to preserve Yemen's stability and to avert adverse outcomes. According to statistics published by the Energy Information Administration, crude oil output averaged 413,300 barrels per day in 2005, a reduction from 423,700 barrels in 2004. For the first 8 months of 2006, crude oil output was flat, averaging 412,500 barrels Following a minor discovery in 1982 in the south, an American company found an oil basin near Marib in 1984. A total of 27,000 cubic meters of oil per day were produced there in 1995. A small oil refinery began operations near Marib in 1986. A Soviet discovery in the southern governorate of Shabwa has proven only marginally successful even when taken over by a different group. A Western consortium began exporting oil from Masala in the Hadramaut in 1993, and production there reached 67,000 cubic meters per day in 1999. More than a dozen other companies have been unsuccessful in finding commercial quantities of oil. There are new finds in the Jannah and East Shabwa blocks. Yemen's oil exports in 1995 earned about $1 billion. Marib oil contains associated natural gas. In September 1995, the Yemeni government signed an agreement that designated Total of France to be the lead company for a project for the export of liquefied natural gas. In 1997, Yemen Gas Company joined with various privately held companies to establish Yemen LNG. In August 2005, the government gave final approval to 3 LNG supply agreements, enabling YLNG to award a $2 billion contract to an international consortium to build the country's first liquefaction plant at Balhat on the Arabian Sea coast. The project is a $3.7 billion investment over 25 years, producing approximately 6.7 million tons of LNG annually, with shipments likely to go to the United States and South Korea. Production of LNG began in October 2009. The Yemen government expects the LNG project to add $350 million to its budget and enable it to develop a petrochemicals industry and manufacturing. The U.S. government estimates that Yemen's industrial sector constitutes 47.2% of gross domestic product. Together with services, construction, and commerce, industry accounts for less than 25% of the labor force. The largest contributor to the manufacturing sector's output is oil refining, which generates roughly 40% of total revenue. The remainder of this sector consists of the production of consumer goods and construction materials. Manufacturing constituted approximately 9.5% of Yemen's gross domestic product in 2005. In 2000, Yemen had almost 34,000 industrial establishments with a total of slightly fewer than 115,000 workers. The majority of the establishments were small businesses. Almost half of all industrial establishments are involved in processing food products and beverages. The production of flour and cooking oil has increased in recent years. Approximately 10% of the establishments are classified as manufacturing mixed metal products such as water storage tanks, doors, and windows. Services and tourism economists have reported that Yemen's services sector constituted 51.7% of gross domestic product in 2002 and 52.2% of GDP in 2003. The U.S. government estimates that the services sector accounted for 39.7% of gross domestic product in 2004 and 39.3% in 2005. Yemen's tourism industry is hampered by limited infrastructure as well as serious security concerns. The country's hotels and restaurants are below international standards, and air and road transportation is largely inadequate. Kidnappings of foreign tourists remain a threat, especially outside the main cities, and, coupled with terrorist bombings at the port of Aden in 2000 and 2002, present a significant deterrent to tourism. As recently as September 2006, tribesmen in the Showa province, east of Sana'a, kidnapped 4 French tourists on their way to Aden. They were freed 2 weeks later. In October 2006, the U.S. Department of State reiterated previous warnings to U.S. citizens, strongly urging them to consider carefully the risks of traveling to Yemen. Britain's Foreign Office has issued a similar advisory. Recent statistics for tourist arrivals in Yemen are not available, but in 2004 the number rose to 274,000 from 155,000 in 2003. Labor. According to the U.S. government, the agriculture and herding sector employs the majority of Yemen's working population. Industry, together with services, construction, and commerce, accounts for less than 25% of the labor force. According to the World Bank, Yemen's civil service is characterized by a large, poorly paid workforce and inadequate salary differential between high and low-skilled jobs to attract and retain qualified workers. In 2004, the government increased civil service salaries by 20 to 40% in order to alleviate the impact of anticipated economic reforms that were never implemented. The result was a 20% rise in wage costs. Civil service wages constituted 7% of gross domestic product in 2004. The 2005 budget reduced economic subsidies but in exchange required the government to make various concessions, including increasing civil service wages another 10 to 15% by 2007 as part of a national wage strategy. The economic assistance package the International Monetary Fund pledged to Yemen is contingent on the implementation of civil service reform, which the government has resisted because of the country's estimated 20 to 40% unemployment rate. In 2004, the government claimed to have reduced the civil service labor force through retirements and layoffs, but it appears that the large salary increases have lessened the impact of any reforms. The IMF has stated that civil service salaries as a component of gross domestic product should be reduced 1 to 2%, a level that can only be achieved with continued reductions in the size of the civil service. It is unclear whether the national wage strategy, which may succeed in streamlining the system and removing irregularities, will in fact be able to reduce employment costs, currency, exchange rate, and inflation. Yemen's currency is the Yemeni rial, which was floated on the open market in July 1996. Periodic intervention by the Central Bank of Yemen has enabled the rial to gradually depreciate approximately 4% per year since 1999. Its valued average year 191.5 per $1 in 2005, and has averaged year 197.5 in 2006. In late November 2006, the exchange rate was about YR198 per $1. During the years immediately following unification, Yemen experienced a very high average rate of inflation, 40%. Economic reforms brought this rate down to only 5.4% in 1997, but high oil prices and cuts in the fuel subsidy in recent years have had a negative impact on the inflation rate, which has generally been on the rise despite some fluctuations. In 2004, efforts by the Central Bank of Yemen to tighten the money supply were offset by a weakening US dollar, to which the Yemeni rial is linked in a managed float, and by rising global commodity prices, resulting in an inflation rate of 12.5%. In July 2005, the government succumbed to public opposition and lowered the new general sales tax from 10 to 5%. This tax, coupled with reductions in government fuel subsidies and higher import prices, is expected to result in an estimated inflation rate of 15% in 2006, up from 11.8% in 2005. Banking and finance. According to economists, Yemen's financial services sector is underdeveloped and dominated by the banking system. Yemen has no public stock exchange. The banking system consists of the Central Bank of Yemen, 15 commercial banks, and 2 specialized state-owned development banks. The Central Bank of Yemen controls monetary policy and oversees the transfer of currencies abroad. It is the lender of last resort, exercises supervisory authority over commercial banks, and serves as a banker to the government. Since end 2005 and up to the end of 2010, Tadhaman International Islamic Bank has maintained the top spot between all banks in Yemen in terms of total assets, capital and trade business. The largest commercial bank, the Credit and Agricultural Cooperative Bank, which is state-owned, and the Yemen Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is majority state-owned, are currently being restructured with the goal of eventual privatization, because of fiscal difficulties in both banks. In 2004, Yemen's government adopted a plan to merge them. The new publicly owned development bank will have a minimum capital of $50 million. Till end April 2011, this step has yet to materialize. The large volume of non-performing loans, low capitalization, and weak enforcement of regulatory standards hamper Yemen's banking sector as a whole. Numerous banks are technically insolvent. Because many debtors are in default, Yemen's banks limit their lending activities to a select group of consumers and businesses. As a result, the entire banking system holds less than 60% of the money supply. The bulk of the economy operates with cash. Legislation adopted in 2000 gave the central bank the authority to enforce tougher lending requirements. And in mid-2005 the central bank promulgated several new capital requirements for commercial banks aimed at curtailing currency speculation and protecting deposits.